Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside Assault Sicily 43, the Gela Beachhead. This is a tactical game designed by Wolfgang Klein and Eric Rankel, and it is published by Assault Games in conjunction with Sound of Drums. Now, we've seen Red Horizon 41 on the channel already, and now this is the second game in the series, Sicily 43. It's fantastic that this series is continuing on after the first one, because the first one was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. All three of us on Whiskey Charlie have really talked the game up quite a bit. We've all enjoyed it, and it's great to see the system continuing to evolve and grow. And now with the second one, we're going to see some more additions to the series and a standardization of the rulebook to version 2.0. So let's take a look at the back of the box and see what this game's all about. Mediterranean Sea, southwest coast of Sicily. It was the early morning of 10 July 1943 when the first landing craft dropped their ramps at Gela and the first units of U.S. Rangers set their boots on Italian soil. Together with the British and Canadian units that had landed further east, the Western Allies launched an unprecedented landing operation to push open the gate to Fortress Europe. The night before, on 9th July, American and British airborne troops had already dropped into enemy territory behind the planned beach landing zones to occupy important positions. This was to prevent or delay timely counterattacks by Italian and German troops on the day of the landing. This operation, called Husky, was the beginning of the end of the Italian army as an ally of the German Wehrmacht. It was the additional front long demanded by Stalin, and thus brought the necessary relief of the Eastern Front. Assault Sicily 43 is the second volume in a planned series of tactical-level wargames in which players lead historical units into battle during the landing and airborne operations around Gela Beachhead in July 1943. Underneath, it gives us the game characteristics. It is for 2 to 4 players. Great solo playability, which is very true. This game is definitely very solitaire-friendly. It's for ages 14 and up. Game scale is squad and team-level infantry units, individual vehicles, and artillery. Each turn represents 5 to 30 minutes of time. Game time is from 1 to 3 hours plus, that is scenario dependent. Complexity, 6 out of 10, which makes it medium. There are optional rules that ease the entry into the game system. Replay value is 10 out of 10. And the last line here, it says, this game is a tactical wargame sandbox. It can be combined with the Eastern Front module Assault Red Horizon 41, which is fantastic because that is a great module on its own. You add them two together, you have just an amazing amount of replayability. Game content, you get 3 factions, US, Italy, and Germany, 12 double-sided geomorphic maps, more than 700 unit counters and markers, 40 scenarios in the campaign and scenario book, dynamic campaign game for the Gela Beachhead, 64 different unit types and unit cards, 57 command cards used to bring in your leaders and heroes' behavior, 90 formation cards, 72 tactical air and offboard artillery cards, 16 customized dice, 4 player aid cards, and a lot of fun, which I will definitely agree with. So let's flip this big, giant, hefty box over and take a look inside and see what we get. And we get our rulebook, spiral bound, which is fantastic. I love that for rules. Same for the campaign book, outstanding. Player actions, player aids. And a whole bunch of counter sheets here. On both sides. Got beautifully mounted player aid cards. The amazing geomorphic maps, which are just really beautiful. And look at this insert, along with the cards, the dice, and all the spots that you can use to store all your pieces. So let's set up the maps and take a closer look at the game. So I've taken 4 map tiles and just randomly set them up in what would be something you'd expect to see in a scenario. This probably is from a scenario, but if it's not, you can see how easy it is to create something that can be used for a scenario that you create yourself. You've got a long strip of beach here and then the town up there. You've got the shallows, you've got rocky here, you've got brush, a hill right here, another hill here, and that's going to be important because there are elevation changes In this game, which is going to affect LOS, you've got single-story and two-story buildings that you'll be using in the game, and it's very easy to see. The single-story are going to be the stone or wood color, and then the red ones are going to be the two-story. We've got vine and olive groves over here. We've got plenty of roads throughout. There's forest, light forest, there are bridges, and you can extend the maps even more with these little strips. There are 4 of these little ones here. For example, you can just throw it down there, extends the map out a little bit more, which is going to be obviously scenario driven, or if you're creating your own maps, you can do that. And the best part about these is, just like all of these tiles, they're double-sided. So you're going to have different terrain on either side. Remember I was talking about the bridge? There's an example of a bridge right there. But it's beautiful to have all of these options with these maps. They're really well done. And if you notice that they're not laying perfectly together, these are not warped. That's my table. My table's warped. I'm not using the same table I've been using for years. I'm using a different table now once we moved into this other house. And it's kind of a warped table. I make do with it because it works. It was a $20 Facebook fine, so I'm definitely not going to complain. At some point, I will sit down and level it off, but that's why you see that. I just want to make sure that nobody thought that these were warped. These boards are perfectly flat. My table's warped, but beautifully done as they were in Red Horizon 41. Let's flip these over so you can see the other side of these tiles. You can see how busy they are, the varied terrain that you're going to have. These look like really rough maps to fight on. And then we pull these other ones in from off camera. We've got the little strips that I was talking about, and then we've got some thicker ones with the different types of terrain on those. We've already looked at that. It has the bridge. This one has a path similar to that one, or a road. Then we've got these other 4 tiles here. See the terrain on this side, and then rougher on the back side. The next tile, same thing. Really harsh terrain on the other side. And then on this last one, you see what we've got there. But you get plenty of different options, not only to set up with the scenarios that come with the game, but also to create your own. And these are compatible with Red Horizon 41, so you can very easily use the map tiles from that game with this game when you're creating your own scenarios. So endless possibilities. Great job by Assault Games. Next, we'll take a look at the player aids that come with the game. First up are the player actions. At the top, we see the range fire action. It's going to give you all the steps for range fire, as well as the references in the rules if you need to reference them, where to go in understanding each of the rules for range fire. Below that, we have the spotting roll and range fire modification tables. And at the bottom, we have the same thing we saw at the top for range fire. We have the steps for close combat, along with the rules references on the left-hand side. And that carries over to the back, where we have steps for movement, as well as the special steps like passing, reaction fire, and playing your command cards. Next, we have the turn record track that also has the sequence of play on the front. And on the back, we have the troop status board. And this is a new feature in the game now. This is going to be used to record the effects during combat from pressure, casualties, things like that. They're all going to mount up on your troops, and that's going to hinder their effectiveness. I think it's a great addition because I've always said, and especially in tactical games, we need to have more of the human element modeled, and I'm glad to see that Assault Games has added this into this next iteration of their ongoing system. Next up, we have the terrain effects chart. This lists out the different types of terrain that are in the game, as well as a graphical representation of each. Then we have the terrain defense bonus die roll modifiers, movement cost for each movement type, vehicle damage from terrain, line of sight modifier, and the elevation that the piece of terrain is at. And the other thing that's really awesome about these is just what we've become used to with Sound of Drums games, Assault Games working now in conjunction with them. These are really beautifully done, fully wrapped, mounted player aids. So outstanding job by both Assault Games and Sound of Drums. Really love the high quality components like this. Next, we have the range fire aid, which gives us a listing of the modifications to the attack die, spotting roll table, critical hits versus infantry and artillery units, and critical hits versus vehicle units. And that carries over to the back where we have the modifications to the defense dice and the ranged fire modification table at the bottom right. Next, we have the close combat aid, which gives us the attack dice in close combat, assaulting units dice modification, defending units dice modification, and the defense dice in close combat, as well as the defending units dice modification and assaulting units dice modification there. On the back, we have the fortification chart, which gives us a whole bunch of new features in the game here. We've got sandbag positions, trenches, gun positions, bunkers, and pillboxes. It's going to explain to you the terrain defense bonus for each of those fortifications, movement costs for each movement type, vehicle damage from that terrain, line of sight modifiers, and the elevation. At the bottom, we have the experience levels and minefields, another new addition to this series. On the next sheet, we have the offboard artillery support. Remember, that was an expansion for Red Horizon 41. It is now incorporated into the game itself, no longer just an expansion. It is now part of the game. We get the tables for the firing exploratory shells, the offboard artillery support fire modes, blast values versus buildings, and the craters due to OAS attacks at the bottom. And on the back, we have all the tables and steps for tactical air support. At the top, it gives us the task sequence. Then we have the anti-aircraft units attack and the anti-aircraft results table. Below that, we have the task unit spotting and task units accuracy. At the bottom, we have the steps for friendly fire. Next, we'll take a look at the counter sheets that come with the game, and there are a bunch. First up, we have the unit counters. These are the German units. We've got an Italian unit and a few American units mixed in there. At the bottom, these are going to be administrative counters. These are going to be to designate the level of your troops. The German forces carry over to the second sheet. On the first sheet, we saw primarily infantry, both rifles and grenadiers. Now we've got tank hunters, heavy machine guns, mortars, anti-tank guns, and flak guns. And the German forces finish on the third sheet with tanks and various motorized vehicles and armored fighting vehicles. Next up are the Italian forces. More Italian forces on their second sheet. And just like the Germans, and we'll see in the upcoming Americans, they finish out on sheet 3. On the last 3 sheets, we get to the Americans. We've got rifles, airborne rifles, rangers, combat engineers, bazooka teams, and 30 caliber machine guns. On the second sheet, we've got anti-tank guns, mortars, Bofors, 75mm field guns, snipers, 50 cal machine guns, and the M5 Stuart. And the U.S. forces finish out on their third and final sheet with more M5 Stuarts, M4A1 Shermans, M7 Priests, M10 Wolverines, and M3 half-tracks, as well as some M8 Greyhounds. And the remainder of the sheets will be for the administrative counters for use in the game. On this first one, we do have some leftover U.S. and German forces. On the next sheet, we have counters for the different orders that you can use in the game. That carries over to the next sheet. And then we finish out with the tactical airstrikes and the offboard artillery punchboard, which is going to give us various craters that we could be placing on top of the map as parts of the map deform from attacks from air and artillery. And on the last sheet, we have the secondary terrain. This is going to be for the new features like barbed wire, pillboxes, things like that we saw when we looked at the back of the box, minefields, all that stuff. Those are all going to be represented by these counters here. Next, we'll take a look at a few examples of the command cards in the game. Along the bottom, we have the faction-specific cards, and at the top, we have the neutral cards, which could be used by either side. Have the US here, Germans, and then the Italians. For the US, we've got Snake Eaters. Before activation is when this card is used. Add 1 damage symbol to the result of your close combat defense die once. There's also an alternative effect at the bottom, which is anytime get 1 blue attack die for a ranged fire or close combat action. Over here for the Germans, well drilled, gain 1 additional command point for this game turn. For the Italians, take cover, flip 1 defense die to the opposite side after dice were rolled. Then at the bottom we have the alternative effect, which can be used anytime, and that is to re-roll the weakest defense die. Then for the neutral cards, which can be used by any faction, at the top we have Artillery Spotter, re-roll the accuracy roll for offboard artillery support. At the bottom, we have an add +1 to the spotting roll result, which is the alternative use of the card. In the middle, we have mine detection. Add +2 to the D6 detection roll to identify minefields. And then at the bottom, the alternative use is to add +1 on the spotting roll. That is before activation. On the right-hand side, we have one for leadership, and that is during the organization phase. When the pressure marker on the troop pressure track would go up, roll a D6. On a 3+, the pressure marker won't go up. Alternative use is to ignore one suppression after being attacked. Then we'll take a look at the formation cards and the unit data cards. Formation cards are along the top. We have the US, Germans, and the Italians. Below that, we have the unit data cards for just a couple of the units for each faction. It'll tell you here for the 1st Ranger Battalion, you have the infantry support gun section. You get a 37mm ATG, 2 75mm field guns, and then 3 trucks. Over here for the FJ Panzer Division, Hermann Goering, they are a recon platoon, 4 rifles, 43, 2 tank hunters, 43, and 1 sniper, 43. 4th Division, Livorno Mobile Group E, heavy recon platoon. We got 1 L640, 2 Autoblinda 41, and then 1 Camionetta AS42. At the bottom, we have some of the data cards, as I had said. We've got M4 Shermans, Panzer IVs, M1441s for some armor, airborne rifles, grenadiers 43, and then rifles 43 for the infantry. Each of these cards is broken down the exact same way. At the top left, you're going to see the unit faction symbol, and inside that, that is a number. That is going to be the points value of that unit. Below that, you'll see the number of hearts. That tells you the strength points for the unit, and then it'll give you the defense die. You'll notice for the infantry, the defense die are all yellow for all the infantry, but then there are different types for the armor that's out there, and that is based on the location of the attack. From the front, the side, rear, or the top, you're going to be using those type of dice for each of those locations, depending on where the hit location is going to be. Then at the bottom, we have a breakdown of the types of units you can attack, and the ranges, and then the dice that you're going to be using based on those ranges. You see the big hex here? There's a smaller hex underneath it, and that is going to tell you the range band itself, from 1 to 3, 4 to 8, or 9 to 13 for this one. For the airborne rifles, 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 10. Again, within each range band, it's going to tell you what dice you're going to be using based on the target and the range. Very easy to follow along, and the best part about it is if you have multiple airborne rifles, Grenadiers 43 out on the map, you only need the one data card out there to keep track of what dice you're going to be using every time they're engaged in combat. Next, we'll take a look at the rules. This is a 51-page full-color rulebook, and as I said before, this is beautifully done spiral-bound. I love spiral-bound manuals because they lay flat on the table when you open them up. You can fold them in half, and they can take a lot of abuse when they get these nice thick covers like this one has here. Inside of the front cover, we have the table of contents listing out all the different rule sections and their associated page numbers. And it's also color-coded, as you can see, makes it easier to look things up. Then we get to the game components. Going to tell you all of the different pieces in the game and how they're going to be used. It's a beautifully laid out rule book, very easy to read. Get to the introduction and overview, game objective, victory conditions, rules of play, basic rules, unit-specific rules, and then optional rules. There are some optional rules that they recommend you don't use on your first time out if you've never played the system before. Save those after you've played a few games and you've got the system down pat, which is not going to be really hard to understand. It's a really straightforward system, but you do want to play with just the basic rules until you add in the optional rules. I don't want to say basic rules. You want to play with the game rules, and then you add in the optionals once you got the game down pat. Your formation cards, unit cards, point value, armored and unarmored vehicles. We got the explanation of your unit cards at the top, which we've already taken a look at, the different experience levels, and then your unit counters, which we've also taken a look at, status markers, your battle dice, player aids, campaign book, scenario map tiles, optional rules and expansions, command cards, command points, tactical air and artillery support, troop status board, minefield markers, terrain damage markers, and the tactical air and off-board artillery support cards. Those are all the optional rules that you can add in if you choose to, once you've played the base game. And we get to the game preparation, scenario selection, choosing your factions, alternate history scenarios, number of players, shared formation cards, setting up the game board, selecting your formation cards, scenario reinforcements and additional starting forces, unit placement, setting up your command deck, And then we get to the sequence of play here on page 12. Initiative phase, planning phase, drawing your command cards, assigning command points, support phase. You've got anything that's important is called out in yellow, so very easy to pick up on those pieces. We have action phase overview, organization phase, victory check phase, and then placing your reinforcements. Support phase, indirect fire, spotting for indirect fire on vehicles, results of indirect fire, firing smoke. A couple of really good illustrated examples as well, because it's not hard to understand these concepts. They're pretty straightforward, but it's nice that they added in these additional illustrated examples for that. Artillery phase change, special abilities, special actions like passing, reaction fire, and playing command cards. After reaction by inactive player, your movement actions, normal movement, fast movement, movement and firing, terrain movement costs, harsh terrain, special terrain types. We get hills, buildings, single story, multi-story, roads and trails. All these things we've already looked at when we looked at the maps. Got some illustrated examples over here. Tree alleys, urban alleys, covered trails, fortifications. Sandbag positions, trenches, gun positions, bunkers, pillboxes, obstacles, stone walls. These are all new additions, fantastic additions to the series as well. Steep slopes, barbed wire, tank barricades, minefields, and then placing your minefields, processing the minefields, and then capturing objective hexes, infantry-specific movements, digging in, reinforcing a position, artillery-specific movement, vehicle-specific movement with illustrated examples for both, damage to your vehicle units from terrain, resolving damage from terrain, overrunning artillery units, transport capacity, loading and dismounting your units, loading and mobile artillery, unloading and mobile artillery, hide action and ambush, hidden movement for infantry, hidden units overall, and then we have the artillery and vehicle hide action, ambush, movement with covering fire, range factor, line of sight, which is always an interesting and frustrating at times concept in tactical games, checking your line of sight, elevation and line of sight, but they've got a few examples here to help you understand that. Direct fire spotting, automatic direct fire spotting, arc of fire, resolving combat, attack and defense dice, comparing your die rolls, assigning damage, and critical hits. The combat is interesting because you've got these custom dice that you're going to be rolling off against each other, trying to hit and cancel hits. So I think it's really cool how the combat works in here. It's much more interactive, keeps both players really involved. Critical hits versus infantry and artillery, critical hits versus vehicles, critical hits versus buildings, attack dice in range fire, attacking unit status, experience levels, special abilities and attributes on a unit card, joint fire, defense dice in range fire, terrain defense dice, hindered LOS to target unit, defender's area of impact, attacker's fire status, range fire modification table, special abilities and attributes, experience levels, range fire on vehicles transporting units, vehicles with tank riders, eliminated critical hits on vehicles transporting units, emergency disembark. Then we have close combat. One of the things that I was excited about was when I heard that they've changed the close combat up to where they streamlined it and they're making it move faster and be more action oriented, because they felt that the first one was a little bit fiddly, and I kind of tend to agree with them. Resolving close combat, initiating close combat, supporting a close combat. And then we have the attack dice in close combat and defense dice. We saw that with the player aid. Assigning your damage, adrenaline rush, ending close combat, withdrawing from close combat. Your elimination, dug-in defender, area of attack, emergency disembark, infantry special attack versus vehicles. Close combat example here, all laid out for you to follow along so you can understand the concept. Then we have the tactical air and off-board artillery support, which before was an expansion, as I said earlier, and it is now part of the game system. Gives you the contents listing out for you, what comes with it, integrating the TAOAS expansion, removing command cards, adding the cards, planning phase, the TAOAS cards after use, tactical air support, and then request for tasks during planning phase, timing of the task, defense against it, identifying it, task defense against AA fire, task attack resolution, task spotting, task accuracy, task second attack run, accuracy modifiers for second attack, attack result, destroying buildings, fortifications, and obstacles. Then we get to the off-board artillery support, your OAS, how to request it, arrival time, spotting the target hex, firing exploratory shells, artillery strike, your fire modes, smoke screen, suppressive fire, fire for effect, impact area, attack result, destroying buildings, fortifications, and obstacles. Then in craters due to the attacks, remember we saw that with the secondary terrain pieces that come with the counter sheets. Blast values, summary of status markers and their effects, general status markers, action status markers, morale status markers, and then assault resources and support. This is going to give you a little explanation of who Assault Games is, recommended literature, a little connection to their website, video resources, tabletop simulator, vassal modules, how to become parts of the community, listing of all the different types of social media they have, their additional products. And we have the index on the last couple pages. And then we are at the back of the rulebook. And lastly, we have the campaign book. This is a 103-page full-color book. Inside of the front cover, we have the table of contents. It's going to list out all the different sections, their associated page numbers. We have the introduction, campaign rules, campaign setup, scenario setup, your battle phase, follow-up scenario resolution phase, end of game and victory conditions, and then the scenarios, and then the Gela Beachhead campaign all listed out for you here, then the campaign results, and then the individual scenarios are going to be on page 78. There's a template for the troop roster sheet, a template for a unit experience sheet, and then the unit identification and classification. Overview of the Gela Beachhead campaign. It's going to give you a breakdown of what's in each of the chapters. There's an introduction to the actual campaign itself. Then we have the campaign rules, campaign setup, choosing campaign mode, choosing your factions, selecting the core units, selection for standard campaign mode, and selection for Grognard mode. Now, Grognard mode is going to appeal to a lot of people who want to play a little more difficult version of the game. That's going to be a fixed pool of pre-selected core units, and that's it. You got it for the duration of the campaign, which is going to be pretty neat. Then they have the historical setup, non-historical setup, setting up your core units, creating the troop roster, alternate history campaign. Then we have scenario setup, new and old formations, standard campaign mode, Grognard campaign mode, and then the scenario reinforcements, your command cards, tactical air and artillery support, troop status values, battle phase, your troop status board, how that's all going to be handled, because that's important to monitor the status of your troops. Follow-up scenario resolution phase. Then we have the standard campaign mode, destroyed core units, Grognard campaign mode, cleaning up the game board, reinforcing the core units, selection of the next scenario, and then the end of game and victory conditions. And then we get into the scenarios themselves, which are going to be broken down all the same way. We start off with day one, Gela Beachhead campaign, 10 July 1943. Get your foot on the ground is the first scenario. We have our scenario setup, special rules, troop status values, reinforcements, victory conditions, and then a breakdown over here on the map itself as to how you're going to deploy your units, where you're going to have your objectives, things like that. It is a total of 10 turns. All of these scenarios in this book are going to follow the same format. We have City Rumble. You see the layout of the maps, how each one changes up. City Rumble 2.3, Avanti Savoia, second part of that scenario, and the third part. So each one looks like it's going to have multiple parts. Beachhead Defense 3.5, and then Advanced North 4.1, 4.2, Defend Gela 4.3. Look at that size of that one. That one's going to be good size and fun to play on. Recap Gela. Then we have day two, 11 July 1943. And it's going to follow the same format. I'm not going to go through each of these scenarios. We're just going to flip through ahead. Then we have final counterattack here for scenario 6. That's 6.3, 6.4, 6.5 beachhead defense, 6.6, 6.7. And you can see there are a lot of scenarios here. Then we have the campaign results. Advanced upon Olivo, green faction major victory, green faction minor victory, draw, final counterattack, green faction minor victory or draw. Then we have beachhead defense. Gives you all the breakdowns of each of the scenarios, all the victory conditions for those. Then we have individual scenarios here, infantry training. This is a great way to just throw some units out there and get a feel for how to play the game. Vehicle training, Bunker Hill, Into the Dark, the Dirty Dozen, element of surprise. So if you've not played this before and you're interested in this, they're going to walk you through with some much smaller scenarios before you jump into the big ones and get into the campaign itself. And you see these are good sized scenarios as well. They're going to build up each one, becoming more involved as you go along. Kick them out. Then Stranger Things on Sicily. Then we have the template for the troop roster sheet, the template for the unit experience sheet, then the unit identification and classification on the last 2 pages, and then we are at the back of the scenario book. And that is a look at everything you get inside of Assault Sicily 43, Gela Beachhead. This is a game designed by Wolfgang Klein and Eric Rankel, and it is published by Assault Games through Sound of Drums. Well, I said at the beginning of the video, I was real excited to see the partnership between Assault Games and Sound of Drums. Both publishers are making really fantastic games. Assault Games came out with Red Horizon 41, which was just awesome, off the charts, just really great quality production and a really, really fun game. They partnered with Sound of Drums and their production quality has increased, believe it or not. Not only that, but you see the amount of great stuff you have here, and something I didn't show you before, which I'm going to show you now. I think you saw it at the beginning of the video, but it comes with an insert. So you can put those hex-shaped units in these different areas. You've got areas for your cards, other bits and bobs, and then you'll have a clear top that goes over it. So they've really thought of everything here, and it's fantastic to see that from Uwe and Wolfgang together. Just a great partnership. I am just really excited to see what both of these guys are going to do going forward with this system, because this can continue on through Europe, and then hopefully we'll see some in the Pacific. Hint, hint, I'd love to see some Marine action with this, because this is a really, really fun tactical system, and you get so much good stuff. All of these map pieces, you can create not only the scenarios that come with the game, but you can create an unending assortment of maps on your own when you create your own scenarios. You've got the points here that you can just build your forces out as you create scenarios, and you can share them with everybody else. And then if you got Red Horizon 41, you can match up both of those map pieces together, and you have a really just an amazing amount of stuff that you put out there on the table. So if you've never played Red Horizon 41 or Assault Sicily 43, and you're interested in a tactical game that has kind of a miniatures vibe to it, because the units on a hex and counter war game, you get your units, get all your information on your unit counter. Here you don't. You just get the unit name. You get to know what type it is. You get all the information off the data card. The movement, the attack values based on range, what their strengths are, so on and so forth, the points, all that stuff. It's right on the data card, which is really, really cool, because then as you're looking down, you get your information off your data card. You're moving the units around. You don't have to try to math it out when you're going along and trying to stack units together and build these killer stacks. You can't do that in this game. You're actually just really concerned with moving, using the terrain to your advantage, and getting involved in combat to the best effect that your unit can do. So a lot of fun and pretty simple, straightforward game to get into, but it's got a lot more depth than you think. And it's got a lot of depth when you get into the scenarios that come with the game. And then as we saw, the scenario, the campaign itself is just really, really involved. It's going to be one of those ones that takes a while to play through. And you've got a couple different modes. You can play it in standard mode, or you can play in grognard mode, where you get a limited force pool and that's it. So you got options to play both ways, and you got 3 factions here: US, Germans, and the Italians. So it's going to be a lot of fun playing this game. I know I keep saying a lot of fun, but I can't stress it enough when it comes to this system. It is a really, really fun system, and if you've not checked it out, I strongly recommend you give it a good look. And if you get a chance to see it at a con, or one of your buddies has a copy, sit down, play it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. On top of the amazing production quality, the gameplay is just as good as what you see here on the table. Well, I hope that helps you guys out if you've been curious about this one. If you have any comments or questions, post them down below. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next time.